Hello everybody, I'm back here today to officially begin my campaign, my reason to be on BookTube, which is getting Don Winslow to eventually talk to me. Jokes aside, I'm here today to talk a bit about one of my favourite authors, which is Don Winslow. I'm sitting here with a stack of his books on my lap, which is quite difficult to balance. These are all the physical books of his that I own. I have actually read almost all of his fiction. He has written over 20 novels and a short story collection. I've read all but 2. There's a reason for that and I'll get to it. So Don Winslow is a writer who you will find in the crime thriller section of your local bookshop. And this is not a genre that I see a lot on BookTube. So I am not expecting anybody but me to be interested in this video. But regardless, this is going to be the first of a series because, hey, he's one of my favorite authors and I want to talk about it, even if it's to the void. So, hey, if you're the one person that is also interested in Don Winslow, and you've even read him and like his books, please let me know. I am so starved for a conversation about this, as you can tell. So before I get further into this, I'm just going to put these on the floor because they're going to fall as I get animated and start waving my hands around, which I do a lot. People don't tell you until you start editing. You don't know anything about yourself. Don Winslow is, as I mentioned, one of my favorite authors. I've been reading him since I was 16 years old and immediately went and read everything that I could get my hands on out of his back catalogue and have been since keeping up with his releases and stuff like that. And what I've thought of doing is to do a little series deep diving into his bibliography. So what I've done is I have taken all of his fiction and I have categorized them into theme buckets that he generally writes about, and I've broken it down into 4 buckets. So this is going to be an intro video where I talk a little bit about Don Winslow as a writer, what kind of stuff he writes, what his style is like, how I found him, and a little bit of my connection, why I like it so much. And then I'm going to do a video for each theme bucket where I talk about those books a little bit more. So before I get into Don Winslow specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about crime fiction because I find that this is a genre that can be deceptively difficult to grasp and get into for a genre with such mass appeal. And I think, funnily enough, sometimes there are similar preconceptions towards crime fiction, and I'm kind of encompassing crime and thrillers in that since they're lumped together generally in bookshops. But I find there to be similar preconceived notions sometimes as I find towards fantasy from people who don't generally read that genre, where I've encountered people who, read maybe more literary fiction or general fiction or nonfiction who would say or would think that fantasy is pure escapism, pure fun, but not really anything deeper than that because it's not real, right? And I find that there's a similar idea towards crime, where there's an idea of crime just being what we would call an airport thriller and there being no real depth to it further than that of just, a page turner and a whodunit or something like that. And one of the things that I really like about Don Winslow is that he has everything from really solid, fun thrillers up to surprisingly deep, dark, heavy, incredibly well-researched epics, and kind of a little bit of stuff in between, depending on what you're in the mood for. But he still keeps a consistent style throughout all of these, regardless of what he's writing. So I actually find his writing style to be quite distinct. Think short chapters, short sentences, that kind of thing, where he is really good at knowing how to keep you turning the page. I also think that he excels at introducing characters, and with minimal material, let's say, paint a very, very vivid picture of who characters are, even if they're going to be minor characters that might be killed off in the next chapter, but then they're killed off and you have an idea of who they were. So I never or rarely get the sense that a named character is just a random person there to fill the page. They all have a little hint of backstory or a little bit of flavor to them. For example, one of his books opens with a character waking up in the morning and going through his morning routine. This is Frankie Machine. I'll get more into it once I get to that specific video, which is not generally something that would be writing advice, right? I don't think anybody would tell you, yes, open your first chapter of your book with the main character waking up and having breakfast and showering. That's not really interesting. But the way he writes it is surprisingly compelling for the mundanity of what he's writing. And he manages to inject a lot of personality into it and to really tell us who this guy is by describing his morning routine. It's very purposeful. And I enjoy that a lot. And I find that that is actually something that has seeped into my writing and trying to inject a sense of humor into it. He can be quite snappy and a bit snarky, which isn't for everybody. And there are some of his books that get a little bit more experimental and more stylized in that way that I'll showcase in the later videos. So this style might not be for everybody, or it might not be for every mood. Sometimes you want something a little bit more subdued, sometimes you want something snappier and faster, and sometimes you might be in the mood for something a little bit more experimental and out there. Or you might absolutely hate that and like the stuff more in the middle. So to give you an idea of where each book falls in the next videos, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rate these on a Winslow-Spice scale. So think when you go into a restaurant and they have little peppers on the menu showing you how spicy something is. So we're going to do that, but instead of peppers, it's going to be Winslow's. But Yolanda, that's a fat cat. What does that have to do with crime fiction? Well, let me introduce Winslow. That's right. I was so obsessed when I was 17 with my new favorite writer at the time that I named my cat Winslow, which is a name that nobody in my hometown can spell or pronounce or understand, least of all Winslow himself. But we are gonna use him as our spice scale. So we're gonna have anything from 1 Winslow, which is very mild, subdued, more functional prose, up to 5 Winslows, which will be this highly stylized, super snappy, sometimes 3 words per chapter kind of thing. Really dynamic and, a lot of slang and like inside jokes and like snarky sense of humor, that kind of stuff. One more thing I want to say in terms of his writing style is that he is not afraid to get violent and fucked up. This is not cozy crime. So, no Agatha Christie, Louise Penny style murder mystery, not at all. He tells it as it is, especially when he's talking about the drug cartels and the mafia. There's a lot of violence involved in those kind of stories. He doesn't shy away from it. He doesn't glorify it. He just presents it in all of its horrifying reality. Not all of the books are the same in this way. He never shies away. He never fades to black or anything like that. And the same goes for sex scenes. He never really shies away from them. There's not like a huge abundance of like they're there all the time or anything like that. But he doesn't fade to black with anything. So be aware of that. I will mention that when I talk about the individual books later on as well. So along with the Winslow-Spice rater, I will also just give a little bit of a hint of like how dark and messed up it might get. What does Don Winslow actually write? I've just told you he writes crime thrillers and that I've vaguely categorized them into themes. But what are those themes? So the way I have broken it down, we have detective fiction, which are 3 series that he's written, one with 5 books, one with 2, and another one with 2 for now. Then we have mafia, and in here I have put Frankie Machine, which is a standalone, and his newest trilogy, which is the Danny Ryan trilogy, where we have 2 books out at the moment, and then The third one, I think, is meant to come out next year. And in Frankie Machine, we deal with the Italian mafia, and in Danny Ryan, we have both the Italian and the Irish mob on the East Coast. Then I have a general category of thrillers, which are all standalones, I believe, and they're more difficult to classify. Some of them have elements of maybe the mafia in there, or of, you know, a detective coming in and that kind of thing, but they're a bit more vague and difficult to classify, so I've put them together. And then the last category is drug cartels and the war on drugs, which contains a trilogy, the Cartel trilogy, which is his masterpiece, and the Savages duology, which both deal with the war on drugs, more specifically for the Cartel trilogy. That goes a lot deeper into it, but it goes into drug trafficking, drug cartels in South America, and the effect on regular people, essentially. And then to finish it up, I'm going to have one last bonus video talking about a little bit of a special case, which is his novel Satori, which I'm pronouncing Spanish, and that is wrong, but that is how it comes out when I say it, and I can't stop myself. So in the 1970s, Trevanian wrote a novel, a spy thriller called Shibumi, about an assassin named Nikolai Hell, who speaks a bunch of languages and is essentially the most badass, coolest person on the planet. And Don Winslow then wrote a sort of prequel filling in some gaps from his backstory named Satori. So you kind of have to read Shibumi in order to appreciate Satori, but I really liked both of them. His style is a little bit more subdued in it because he's adapting to Trevanian's style, and there's some really cool stuff in there, and I couldn't group it into any other category really. It didn't feel quite right, so I want to make a video speaking specifically about those two books and how they relate to each other. And then to wrap it all up, I'll, you know, maybe reveal my Don Winslow top 5 or top 10, or I can do a top 7. I don't know. We'll see. Why do I like this writer so much? Why am I here planning to do a 6-video series without knowing if anybody is even going to be interested in them? Why have I read every single book almost that he has ever written in the last 12 years? What is it? What is it about Don Winslow? But there's a combination of things. One of them is certainly just that his writing style clicks with me, and I really enjoy his sense of humor and his pacing, and I just always can read his books really quickly and inhale them, and I enjoy doing that. And he gets me invested in a way that a lot of crime books just don't do, because I think that his character work ranges from really solid to fantastic, to be honest, depending on what book I'm reading. And then I just really appreciate the fact that he is really saying something with the books that he's writing. And not every single one is super deep and, you know, a future classic or anything like that. Some of them, like I mentioned, are just kind of harmless fun and entertainment and just really solid crime thrillers. But some of them have really made me think and challenged me and have stayed with me. The obvious one is The Power of the Dog and the entire Cartel trilogy that I've already mentioned as a masterpiece, and I've mentioned in multiple videos, and I will continue to do that. I will never shut up about it, so I'm sorry. I just really appreciate the amount of research that clearly goes into it. So he said this in interviews that he has a very strict routine, that he gets up at 5 a.m, he goes for a run, I believe, and then he starts writing until 12, and that's like his writing day. And he always has more than one book on the go at the same time, so if he gets stuck on one, he just switches over to the other. And in general, I've been reading his books for so long that I can really recognize things that he likes putting in that just keep showing up, or things from his life that I know about from interviews maybe, or something like that that come up. So for example, he likes surfing, and surfing is a theme that, you know, a lot of his characters, some more and some less so, but it's something that keeps being mentioned. He also used to be a safari guide, I believe, and there's a couple of characters in different books that have private zoos, which is such an oddly specific reoccurring thing to have. But I enjoy spotting those little elements that pop up more than once, and I'm like, oh, you know, he has an affinity for this for this reason. I kind of know that. So that just comes with reading an author a lot. I did want to talk a little bit about Don Winslow in translation, because I've mentioned that his style can be quite snarky and full of like sarcasm and sense of humor and slang, and that can be quite difficult to translate. So I've actually read Don Winslow in 3 languages. When I discovered him, I was living in Spain, so I read the first few books of his that I ever read in Spanish, and reread them many times in Spanish. Then not every book was translated into Spanish, so I started hunting them down, and I bought some of them in German. At the time I wasn't ordering online, so it was just whatever I could find in actual physical bookshops. So I read a couple of his books in German, and then later only I started to read them in English and start rebuying his back catalogue in English. So there are quite a few of his books that I have yet to read in English, and I would like to someday do a full reread of his bibliography as an adult, and like maybe in publication order, I don't know, we'll see. But I find it really interesting to talk about this and talk about translation, because I obviously fell in love with his writing in Spanish, and I really think that those translations are extremely good, and that they're very good at capturing the same feeling that the original English does. Whereas the German translations, I still enjoy the books, but it so happens that the ones I've read in German are generally more towards the bottom of my ranking. Not that I've actually ever sat down and ranked them, but if I did, they probably would be in like the bottom half, which could be a coincidence, but I don't think it is. I think there's something in the translation, not that it's bad, but I don't think it's as good at capturing the essence of what makes Don Winslow work for me. And the interesting part of this is that he actually has 3 books that have never been published in English, which is wild to me, because he obviously writes in English. He's American. I don't know if I've actually mentioned that. He's lives in San Diego, which you can also kind of tell from a lot of his books. But he loves Germany. So this actually first got on my radar when I bought a book of his called Vergeltung in German. I came across it in a bookshop, and I was researching it, and I was like, which one is this? I don't remember seeing this anywhere in like his bibliography and his website or anything. And I couldn't find it, and I was like, is this a mistake? Like, was this actually written by him? I don't understand. And it turned out that that book had just never been published in English. It was just published in German. And then that happened with 2 more books. One of them is actually called Germany. And I saw that in an interview about that book specifically, he mentioned that he really loves Germany, and this book is set in Germany, so he thought, wouldn't it be cool if it was published in German first? Which is cool, but then it never actually got published in English, and this is like 2016, so it's been a while. So this book called Germany is actually one of the 2 that I haven't read yet, because I couldn't get my hands on it at the time. And I no longer live in Germany, so it's going to be more difficult for me to do. I'm going to have to get it online. The other 2 that are just in German, I have read and enjoyed, but again, they're towards the bottom of my ranking. So I just find that really, really interesting. Before finishing and wrapping up this video, I did want to talk a little bit about his short story collection, Broken. So this came out in 2020. And it was a lockdown read for me. And I hadn't read a new Don Winslow in a while. And a part of me, I think, was actually a bit apprehensive of like, was I obsessed with this as a teenager? And is it still going to be that great? I've read a lot more now. I've read a lot more crime. You know, does it hold up? And I am very pleased to report that it does. So this is not a big book. It has 6 short stories: Broken, Crime 101, The San Diego Zoo, see, told you, zoos, Sunset, Paradise, and The Last Ride. They present a kind of a good picture of thematically what he likes to write about and of his style. You have drug cartels and private detectives and quite deep emotional stuff. He gets quite political as well. I'll warn you there, not all the time, but occasionally, if that's not something that you're in the mood for, you know, it's a good one to know. So these short stories are pretty great. Not all of them are of the same quality. I thought that the second half was the stronger of this one, and the last one in particular really got me. However, the highlight of this collection for me is that he features some of his older characters in these stories. So there's a story specifically about the characters from Savages, and there's a story specifically about one of the detectives that he's written about, Boone Daniels. And then there might or might not be another surprise cameo that made me squeal. Essentially what he's doing is he's confirming that all of his novels and all of his characters live in the same universe and crossover, which excites me and pleases me greatly. It made me so happy. I absolutely loved reading this, and it's been a while, so I might reread them. I think it's a good introduction to somebody that has never read Don Winslow before if you're curious about his writing style and want to sample some bits and pieces here and there. But I think this will bring you so much more joy and payoff if you've read some of his other books and you see the references to them. You don't need it because they're their own self-contained stories, but I read this and I felt so rewarded for being a loyal reader and having read all of his books, because I found so many references and little Easter eggs that I love that. Thank you, Don. Thank you. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope somebody stayed to watch it. If you're interested in what I was mentioning of breaking down Don Winslow's bibliography and you might want to try them, consider subscribing if you haven't already so you can stay on top of the videos. I'll be releasing those in the next couple of weeks. Like the video if you liked it, you know, all the stuff that people on YouTube tell you to do. If you don't mind doing them, that would be really great. I'm really excited to get into the individual books and maybe talk a little bit about which books would suit each type of reader and what you might, you know, enjoy if you're interested in this type of thing. Let me know if you've read Don Winslow, and if you have read multiple of his books, which one's your favorite? If you've only read one, which one did you read? Did you like it? Did you not like it? Why? Please tell me everything. And I will pepper in loads of anecdotes about me reading the books in future videos. Don't you worry about that. I love context, as you know. All right, that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.